Welcome to Study Loop.
Hey everybody, today we're talking about the survival rate of mottled versus solid snails released into their respective regions, okay? So that is basically, if we were going to do like the name of a paper, let's say, since we're making a hypothesis, okay? So let's say we're going to have our cover page, we could have this as our title or something like that, which is kind of fun. And then we're going to use this title, basically. I know it's a mouthful, to make our abstract, which is basically the summary at the beginning of a paper, right? It's going to have some important information to it, including basically all of the information that we're going to use for this problem, because we're also going to need to have the hypothesis. So we're going to need some numbers. In your textbook, it should have some numbers, including, so we'll do survival rate. Then we'll do, so we're going to do a key over here of MS equals mottled snail, and SS equals solid snail. And we can do references. So it talks about mottled snails kind of have well, it doesn't say it here, but we can use some common sense. So let's draw a little snail. A lot of times visual things, although they seem silly, little doodles or whatever, can actually help you understand the question. So I like to have an option, basically, to make you understand what you're looking for here and why the results are showing what they are. So he's going to have a solid color thing. A little smile. Okay, so from now on, we're going to refer to MS as the mottled snails and SS as the solid snails. Okay, so what I was doing earlier was dealing with kind of writing down the data better. So we're going to do survival rate. We're going to do release into MS, so mottled snail number, region. Then we're going to have release into SS region. Oops. Okie dokie. Now we're going to have MS, SS. Okay, now we're going to talk about their survival rates, which is what is going to go down in these boxes. So mottled snails that are going to be released into their respective region, 95. Then we're going to have 22% for solid snails and mottled snails. Then we're going to have 5%. And then we're going to have 93%. Okay? So with these respective survival rates, okay, now that we have all that really important information, we're going to use that to figure out what hypothesis is what we're looking for here. And now we're going to try to figure out, based on the different hypotheses we have, which we have 4 options, which one is correct. So we have option A, option B, option C, and option D. And as we eliminate them, we're going to cross them out, basically, as we're reading them out loud. So let's start out with option A. So basically, option A is a possible hypothesis is the coloration of the snail being dependent on environmental conditions. camouflage is both mottled and solid snails is best during optimum environmental conditions. And it doesn't change according to the region in which they are placed. Okay, I can tell you right now, it's a lot of wordiness. People don't like that in their hypothesis. Hypotheses are supposed to be clear, direct, objective. You're not supposed to put it in emotion like, I feel that these snails are prettier, let's say, for example. So they're probably going to live better here because that's where they're prettier. Not that that's really something that somebody would do, but it is always easier to let your human hubris become a bias. So you always have to be careful about that. And since this problem is being so specific about that it does not want us to do that, and it wants us to explain our reasoning super well, we can figure out that this is not true. So, A is wrong because basically it's talking about coloration as an adaptation in the form of camouflage to protect the snail from predators. However, based on this data, we're seeing that the MS is actually having a better success rate than the solid snail, even if it's own thing. So that's obviously not true. This is saying that being a solid snail is better, and thus this is untrue. Because overall, the higher survival rates are in the MS region, right? If we were going to add these two columns up and then add these, but still the MS are having a higher survival rate. So next up we have B. Possible hypothesis is that the coloration is an adaptation in the form of camouflage to protect the snail from predators, okay? Mottled snails are best camouflaged in the solid snail region. Okay, we know that's wrong. Yippee, it makes it pretty easy. It's saying that mottled snails live best in the solid snail. That's only a 5% thing. We know that's automatically wrong. C, a possible hypothesis, basically talking about the coloration of the snail as an adaptation in the form of camouflage to protect the snail from predators in its native region. I'm already liking this because when you're dealing with papers, a lot of times, if you're getting research or adaptation, you're talking about it as a model organism. This isn't that specific to snail information, so I'm feeling good. But let's keep reading. Because it said native regions. Mottled snails are best camouflaged in their native region and stand out to predators and suffer great predation if they're in that solid snail area. This makes total sense. Let's look at the MS over here. You see? Look, if this was in an area of only blackness, so well, here, let's do black. Of course, it's going to stick out, right? Because that green. So obviously, it's not adapted to that. And same thing with solid snails. If they're in an area that's mostly green and they're black, they're going to be super obvious and they're going to die. So we know that the answer is C. Because this is talking about, it mentions native. So they've adapted to their ecosystem, which is already what the question is set up. And it also mentions that they're having higher survival rates in their actual area that the data is showing here. And since the question doesn't premise that we should not believe the data or anything, we're going to think that C is correct. And then D is incorrect because it is talking about solid snails, again, being more successful in the mottled region, which doesn't even make any sense. Just by, if you knew none of the data, you would know that's wrong. Because you're like, why would it be a higher survival rate? That does happen occasionally. That's a lot of times with invasive organisms that are highly successful. But that's only because they don't have any predators. But it did say that they were camouflaging. So it's not correct. Anyway, I hope you learned something. Have a great day. Goodbye.